Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Let me throw the screen share up for us. And we are continuing. Remember, we had the case of murder. We started off with a case of premeditated murder. Then we went on to a case of manslaughter. But we're going to go back now to clarify some issues. And in some ways, this is really beautiful because it isn't just so black and white. And we realize that when it comes to so many cases in life, there's shading going on, there are exceptional situations, there's always the big C, which is circumstances. So here we go. V'chi yadzid ish al re'ehu. When a person basically acts intentionally against his neighbor. Lehorgo be'orma, to kill him deliberately. Me'im mizbachi, even from off my altar. Tikachenu lamut, you should take him to face his capital charges, literally so he should take him to die. We've already established mot ish vamet. If someone kills someone else, they are guilty of a capital offense. There are places where it's clear that compensation may be given, but essentially in this particular case that the Torah started this whole discussion with, it was life, one life for another life. But as you can see, there are going to be issues. So we just discussed an issue where it was not intentional, and now the Torah goes back to discuss an intentional act. V'chi yazid, lama nemar. So why is this statement here in the Torah? The fisha emar, why? Because another statement, another verse in the Torah says, makeh ish, etc. Remember, that was the first sentence we started off with. Makeh ish vamet, one who strikes a man that he die, etc. Shomea ani. So since it simply says one who strikes, right? I might infer, Shomea ani, rofeh, a physician, shaharag, who in the course of performing his healing act unintentionally killed someone, right? But they may have placed an incision, they may have made an incision that was a makah, right? Another example, v'shaliach beit din shehemit b'malkut arba'im, or the emissary of the court who killed someone, the one who had committed the crime, the criminal. He killed the criminal when he was administering stripes. In other words, there are many of the negative commandments that are not capital offenses. The punishment, it says, in certain cases, is what is called malkut arba'im, 40 lashes. And this person was administering the lashes, and this person died. The criminal died. The offender died. What about a father who is striking his son? V'harav sharodeh et talmido, or a master who is chastising his pupil. V'hashogeg, and it's one who was not intentionally trying. I think he's talking here about possibly other examples where there was no intention to kill the person. Talmud lomar. For this reason, Scripture states explicitly, "V'chi yazid v'lo shogeg," right? And in other words, if he does it intentionally and not unintentionally. And then going on to say, "Lahargo be'arma," right? To kill him deliberately. V'lo shaliach beitin. In other words, this is where you're accepting now the one who was the emissary of the agent of the Beit Din, of the court, v'harofeh, the physician, v'harodeh beno, and one who is correcting his son, v'talmido, or his student. She'afal pi shehem mizidin, because even though they're intending to do this, they're not intending to kill, right? Ein ma'armin. They're not doing it deliberately to kill. They are inflicting pain, they are inflicting hurt, but the intention is not to kill. So those are taken. Basically, what we're saying is those are no longer capital offenses. They are no longer capital cases. What about this little part that says Me'im Mizbechi, from off my altar? Quoting the tractate Sanhedrin 95, Im Haya Kohen, if that individual, this is now, remember, someone who does in fact kill the Mezid intentionally, murders. Im Haya Kohen, if he was a Kohen, Verotzeh la'avod avodah, and he wants to perform his service as a Kohen, tikachenu lamut. You have to remove him to face the capital offense, to be tried on a capital basis. So I was thinking, yeah, go ahead. It's okay.
I was just going to say that Chabad says that's from Mechilta Yoma 85a.
Okay.
And I don't know that conflicts with what you're saying. I'm just noting that, but I mean, because it could also be in Sanhedrin.
Right. So here they're saying Mizbechi, right? This is a different point that they're making, but they are referring to the Mechilta. So the Mechilta probably would do that. It's an earlier source, and very often the Gemara will, in fact, quote earlier sources, such as the Mechilta. So there's no necessary contradiction there.
Yeah, that's what I assumed.
So correct. So just meditating on this particular addition that doesn't seem to be directly connected to the first part of the verse. And I was trying to think to myself, what is the point that it's trying to be made here, and what is Rashi trying to help us, in giving us the application of this verse, the specific application. So I'm wondering to myself if part of the point is that the Kohen performing his service, right, that's a great thing. The practice of the priesthood in the temple was very deliberate, very meticulous in an extraordinary kind of way. And that, of course, to indicate the seriousness with which this was all taking place. And the sort of amazing quality of the ability to actually serve God in the temple. That was an incredible thing that was happening. And it's saying to sort of emphasize the importance of it, and the importance of the fact that this was even being performed. But the point is that under no circumstances should that service, as important as it is, and as fundamental and profound as it is, be performed by someone who had just intentionally killed someone else. That even if he's in the middle of the service, right, which is in a sense a very impertinent and disrespectful act to God, right, that nevertheless taking a life has such profound implications. Committing murder is so awful that even if a person is in the midst, a Kohen happens to be a Kohen, we're using the Kohen as an example, in the midst of something as profound and important as ministering at the altar, where you have to go to the extreme degrees to show respect, you remove him.
No one is exempt.
No.
No one is exempt from premeditated murder.
Correct.
It's premeditated.
But understand something else. That has not been established yet, right? That has to still be established by a court.
Oh, whether it's been right, but
This is saying, I mean,
yeah.
Now, look, it could be talking obviously about a case. Well, if he had been tried and found guilty, right,
Yes.
then he would never be back at the altar. So I don't see how that could even happen, right? So this is saying that if he is suspected of murder, he has, even though that has not been proved yet, he still has to be removed.
Well, he's got blood on his hands, or he may have blood on his hands, and that should keep him from being kosher enough to do this. It's like,
David, you're assuming that he's been found guilty. We have
no,
to,
I'm assuming that not guilty, but somebody must have seen it, because that's how we establish that, correct?
but that person has to say it in court and has to be cross-examined. Witnesses are cross-examined. So again, no one knows
Yeah.
for sure at this point, but even in that case where where it has still to be proved that that person had in fact committed premeditated murder, he is removed from the altar.
So in this
Just
case,
in case.
it almost sounds like it's guilty until proven innocent, as opposed to, innocent until proven guilty. Or, the other point is that typically, people don't necessarily get suspended from what they're doing just because they're accused of something, right? Unless it's, extreme circumstances.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. So David, the person is not assumed. The person is absolutely assumed innocent until proven guilty. Okay. That is absolutely, and in fact, the standards of testimony are such that there has to be an eyewitness for a capital offense to be actually, or capital punishment to be actually performed. There has to be an eyewitness to the act of murder. And then they have to, of course, establish that it was premeditated. I think that it could also be saying that in this particular case, you have to do it. And maybe what the Torah is saying, in fact, is that ministering at the altar has to be above any consideration whatsoever, and even any suspicion of malfeasance, and certainly this kind of malfeasance. And you understand yourself that whenever we discover that someone who is a minister of some kind, right, especially a religious minister, is guilty of some kind of criminal behavior, it is devastating to that religion. It is. It has deep implications, because a priest should be above suspicion.
Absolutely. So I guess the question there is, if he's, maybe we're going to get to this later, but if he's acquitted, was he allowed to continue to perform as a priest? Or okay, so it's just a suspension, so to speak. All right.
I don't know. Yeah, but when it says tikach lamut, it's saying you should take him lamut, to die, but in what it's saying is to prove that he is in fact has committed a capital offense. What you've said, though, is interesting. I haven't read anywhere whether a priest could be reinstated if he was found innocent. Part of the problem is, and it's dreadful, is that once you're accused publicly, you never totally get rid of that. You're always saying that you were accused publicly. So whether or not he can go back and now minister again, good question. I mean, I think it's an excellent question, and I would hope that we would find stuff written on that could clarify that particular question.
I was wondering, Rabbi, when Moses killed that Egyptian, there was a reason he killed him. Now, the reason is the main part of why he killed him, because the Egyptian was hurting another person. I mean, there's got to be.
That's the idea. Yeah, I mean, you're allowed. Self-defense is a legitimate defense. If you're only able to defend yourself by killing your attacker, you are allowed to kill your attacker.
Okay.
So that would have counted there.
Moses was not defending himself. He was defending another.
Correct. He was. But presumably he had no other way of doing it. One has to assume that. There's also another question. I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked into that particular issue terribly. Remember, he was raised in Pharaoh's palace in court. He would have had authority on a certain level, certainly even in Egypt, but he had to flee for his life. So regardless, it's an interesting question, but I want to keep going with what we're doing here. All right. So, umakeh aviv ve'imo, one who strikes his father and his mother. Motumat, guilty of a capital offense. Okay. So there's going to be some clarification on this. Umakeh aviv ve'imo. Lefi shelamadnu al hachovel b'chaveiro. The reason is that we find elsewhere, okay, that one who injures his neighbor or his associate, right, his fellow, shehu b'tashlumim, that in that particular case there is compensation. One who injures someone else or causes injury to another person is responsible for a variety of compensation to that person. That's basically financial. V'lo b'mita, but he's not condemned to death. So he didn't kill the person, right? And this is not talking about killing his parents. It's talking something about striking them.
So is striking, does it have to assume that it caused some injury or damage?
So you're anticipating Rashi. That's
Okay.
going to go to, okay? Utzrach lomar, for this reason, he has to say, ala chovel ba'aviv, that one who causes injury to his father, shehu b'mita, that in this case, he has committed a capital offense. Ve'eino chayav ela b'haka'ah, and he is only, forgive me, he is only guilty of this capital offense if his striking sheyesh ba chavura, where there in fact is injury done to this person, where there is a wound as a result of this striking. So that answers your question, Lauren. So it's interesting, right? How they're analyzing the text, deconstructing the text to be able to come up with these particular issues. Aviv, so it says his father and his mother. And Rashi says, Oze. What it means is either one or the other. It doesn't mean if he strikes both of them. And this is the footnote or the top note I put in here. In case you think from the text, he has to strike both of them at the same time. Rashi's clarifying that's not what it means. It means one or the other. Mot yumat, so the person shall surely be put to death. The fact that the text is stated in this specific kind of way, it means that the way of death, the method of punishment was chenek, strangulation. Going on. Vegonev ish, a person who steals another person, umecharo, and he sells him. Right, he kidnaps someone and sells him. V'nimtza biyado, and that person whom he stole was found in his possession. Mot yumat, shall surely be put to death, is what it means. But it certainly it has to always mean is up for a has committed a capital offense, right? Because we have to understand it is always going to involve a trial. Let's take a look at the issues that Rashi brings up. Vegonev ish umecharo, one who stole a person and sold him. And this, he says, is from the Mechilta. Lama ne'emar, why is this statement in the Torah? Lefi shene'emar, because it states elsewhere in Deuteronomy chapter 24, ki yimatze ish gonev nefesh, if you find a person, a man, who has stolen a soul, me'achav of a soul, someone else of his fellows. And if that was the verse, and we only had that verse, the second verse from Deuteronomy, Einli ela ish sheganav nefesh. We'd only have, since it says ki yimatze ish, you would only be able to say that unless it had to be a man who stole a soul of someone. Isha or tumtum or androgynous sheganvo. But if it happens to be a woman who committed this act, tumtum or androgynous, okay? Tumtum is a category of an individual whose genitals are basically hidden, and you cannot tell what sex, what gender this particular person is because their genitals are covered up. Or androgynous, it's obviously right. You can see that it's a Greek word, androgynous, right? In other words, again, a person whose sex is not determinable because they have both types of sexual organs. Sheganvor. What about if one of these other people stole the man? It just says an ish, right? A man. So what if one of these other categories of people also committed kidnapping? Were guilty of kidnapping. Me9. How do we know they're also guilty? Right? They're also going to be up for this capital offense. Talmud lonar vegonev ish umacharo. In this verse that we just said, it just says one who steals a man. So it doesn't define that it has to be a man. Ulefish ne'emar kan vegonev ish. Okay, and the fact that it says here, one who kidnaps a man, ainli ela gonev ish. From this, I would only be able to infer one who basically kidnaps an adult male from this verse. Gonev isha minayin. How about if he kidnaps a woman? Talmud lomor vegonev nefesh. For that reason, in the other verse, it says one who kidnaps a soul. Doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman. And that's why we need both verses. What one verse lacks, the other verse revealed. Okay. So you're getting a taste now, again, of essential and fundamental rabbinic analysis of the Torah text, to be able to mine out various elements of law in a way that it can be applicable.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to make sure I understand this. So we are looking at what is in Exodus and what is in Deuteronomy.
Correct.
And we're putting them together because things in Deuteronomy are not always exactly the same as the things in Exodus, and they shamar, remember and for shem, whatever it is, shamer v'zachor, right. So we take both of those and we're putting them together as one.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Gotcha. Which I like this, but I like this because I assume that ish in most cases is a person, just because I need to, because I need to. But yeah.
Well, not only that, but because we're now speaking legalese, we are minimizing the application to what it absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, means. So it's not that you can't translate ish as meaning a person, in other contexts. But when it comes to the application of law, you have to be so careful. And so for example, there's a general principle that when the Torah uses a plural word, it means two, the number two, because that's the minimum number you need to apply plurality. So I think that is similar to this. So if it only says ish, and we're talking about someone who's now going to be guilty of a capital offense, we don't want to we don't want to make that wholesale. We want to try and make sure that we limit, especially things like punishments, to the least we have to, that we must. And that's sort of what I think is what's generating this approach to it. That it's trying to take things out of a shadow of a doubt as to what we're talking about.
And I just want to mention, because I don't know that we'll have time to finish these big Rashis, but I think that it's a positive thing in my mind that they talked about alternative gender labels.
Yes, it is interesting, isn't it? I know.
Yeah, in a neutral way.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just, but it's still considered something unique. Okay, it is a whole big deal. This whole thing of including tumtum and androgynous is mentioned in several, in ways in which it may have to apply. So you've got a minor where the gender is defined. You've got, a man, you've got a woman, and you've got these other two categories where, for different reasons, the gender is not defined, cannot be defined. It is 8 o'clock here. We can stop here, and with God's help, we'll do this tomorrow. And I'll put in the bookmark. And please God, tomorrow we will continue. I am going to stop the share. If I can find my cursor. And here we are. Okay, I thank those who may have been watching this recording, and always appreciate any comments a person may want to make, etc. I'm going to stop the recording here.